So welcome to the very last docent tour of the Dream of America in this old Webster School building, our very first and original Nordic Heritage Museum. This is very, very special because now we are moving into our world-class, gorgeous new museum. So this is a little nostalgic to say goodbye to this beautiful exhibit. This exhibit was actually designed and made in Denmark first for an open-air museum there. And we, the Nordic Heritage Museum, opened here in Seattle in 1980. And we didn't get this exhibit we are going to see until 1985. But we then bought it with help from other people and brought it here and then rebuilt it, configured it into our own curlicue spaces here in the old school. So, welcome to the Dream of America. So here we are at the very, very beginning of the Dream of America. This exhibit covers the 100-year period between 1820 and 1920, approximately. And we are talking about the immigration out of all 5 Nordic countries, immigration into, for the most part, America, North America. I should first say that about 52 million people in that time period emigrated out of Europe. And the majority of those people actually came from the Nordic countries. From Norway, for example, over 800,000 people left during that period. And from Sweden, 1.2 million. From Denmark, about 300,000. And from Iceland, quite a bit less because their population was so much smaller. And also from the same from Finland. So what made all of these people leave everything they knew and held dear? Their language, their family, their land, their fishing boat, their farm, and so on. Well, there are many, many reasons that we talk about in this exhibit. The majority of the people left for socio-economic reasons. They were not able to give their children and their younger siblings the life in the Nordic countries that they wanted to. So they decided, where can we go? What can we do? Well, America had been discovered and people had come back. The very early settlers came back and said, this is the land of hope and freedom and absolutely a new life. So in Norway, the people were, in fact, in all the Nordic countries, the law was that the eldest son inherited the land or the boat or whatever the family owned. Okay, so son number 2 and the younger siblings fend for yourself. And many, many, many times it was son number 2 who left to come to America. And that was the rule in Norway. And in fact, it's interesting to me that in Norway, the first organized group of people who came to America were actually Quakers. So it was of religious reasons. In 1925, 52 Quakers boarded the sloop Restoration in Stavanger, Norway, and came to America because they didn't feel welcome, they couldn't worship, they couldn't do what they wanted to do with their religion and their faith in Norway. In Finland, if you turn around and look at that photograph right behind you, they feared Russification. Russia was pushing and pushing and pushing in, especially at the southern part of Finland, Karelia, and they were fearing that they were going to be completely occupied and taken over by Russia. In Denmark, it was a slightly different situation. The southern part of Denmark, called Schleswig-Holstein, was deeded to Germany, or Prussia actually at that time, after the Napoleonic Wars. And all of the people there had great trouble having to then absorb and learn the German language, and a lot of people there in Schleswig-Holstein said, there is no way I am going to raise the German flag I am not going to learn the German language. I am certainly not going to put on a German uniform and fight for Germany. So a huge amount of those people from that part of Denmark, they came to America, most of them to America. So there were many, many different reasons for them leaving. We're going to take a look at this photograph right here. This photograph happens to be from Norway. It's from Hardangerfjord on the southwest coast of Norway. But it shows the typical landscape of Norway. The fjord coming right into the rocky coast, rising up from the water. There is a narrow, narrow strip of tillable land before the mountains then rise beyond. So the people in this rowboat, they have said not just goodbye or ha det, as we say in Norway, or see you later. They have said farewell because they know. And if you look at the little stone pier at the upper third left of this photograph, you see Grandma and Grandpa on that stone pier. They know, and the people in the boat know, we are never going to see one another again. So it must have been a very traumatic decision for these people to come to. Now, why are they leaving in a rowboat? They are coming from in a fjord, so they row out to the next stop where a bigger boat can come in, and then they are going to either Oslo, and from there, very often to Liverpool, and then they get on the large transoceanic boat to come to America. So here we have this gorgeous big Dalahäst, typical of Dalarna in Sweden. It's not very typical because it actually says Nordic Heritage Museum on the horse. So it was a gift to the museum from a group in Sweden. Behind the horse, you see a very typical little Swedish stuga. On the coast of Norway and Sweden in particular, you see these small little red painted houses. And that red is a falunröd or a falun red, which has very high iron content, so it preserves the wood from the element. Now we're going to turn around and we are going to go and look at the little Danish farm, or part of the farm. Since this exhibit was made in Denmark, we have a Danish farm, of course. And if you would like to walk on the boardwalk and take a look into that room, that is the room that a boy 10, 12 years old would be living in, because he would very often be sent away. By 10 or 12, he was old enough he could work and earn money. So he'd frequently be sent down the road to the next farm where they had more land and might need more help. And the few pennies he earned, he would have to bring home to his parents so that they could then feed the younger siblings with that. But it was very, very poor conditions for the poor 10, 12-year-old who had to live in there. When we have children coming through, they go in there and like, I would never stay in that. Well, I wouldn't either. If we look at the picket fence along the wall here, we see at the bottom of the pickets, we see the years between 1868 and 1914. The numbers going up the stake shows the amount of people leaving Denmark. So you can see that there is a tremendous difference between, for example, 1876 and 1882. When things were very poor and bad in Denmark, more people left. When they were good in Denmark, they stayed. And if you look at this as an economic curve, and you compare it to the economic curve of America, it's almost exactly opposite. So things were better in America, very poor in Denmark, they came to America. All the Nordic countries are agrarian. That was what they earned their money on for the most part, and fishing, of course. And so when the Industrial Revolution came, it came first to the big cities. And everyone out in the countryside, they knew, okay, there will be jobs in the big cities. We need to get to the big cities, but first they had to do this dramatic and traumatic thing of taking farewell with their home place and their families. And they had to earn enough money so that they can move into the big city. So here we are now. We are a big extended family, the 8-10 of us here. And we have now done those difficult things. We have earned enough money so we can move into Copenhagen. And it is Copenhagen, again, because this exhibit was built in Denmark. So come with me and move into Copenhagen. So here we are now. We are on the cobblestones on a street that is parallel to Strøget in Copenhagen, the shopping street. These cobblestones, by the way, are not, all the rest of it was more or less brought in from Denmark. The cobblestones came from a park very close to where Webster Elementary School is and where we are now. But here we are on this street. So those of us who have skills and talents, maybe we are dressmakers or tailors, we get a job on the main floor of these business buildings here. Here is a dressmaker or a tailor. There is a bootmaker, a shoemaker, a wooden shoemaker, an alcohol maker, and a master baker. So those of us who have a little bit of money that we are bringing with us, we can work in these shops. If we don't have anything, basically, we go in through this archway into the dark, dank back hallways or backyards, and that's where we rent a room. But that's okay, because we are here to earn money, because we are going to America. We have this dream. And if we walk around the walls and look at the photographs there, you see what some people were doing in the old countries, in the Nordic countries, talents and skills that they brought with them to Ballard and to Seattle and to all over America. Some of the pictures are taken in the Nordic countries and some of them are taken here in Ballard. Like I said, the Industrial Revolution came first to the big cities. If you look at the large photograph at the end of this room right there, you can see it has come. There is a factory. Look at the people working there. Do they have any hard hats? Do they have fireproof or heat-proof gloves? Do you think they have steel-toed shoes? They are working with molten metal. There is no protective gear whatsoever except for their bowler hats, if you could call that protective. But people were willing to work at whatever there was that they could earn money from. So they took jobs doing that. They also took jobs washing clothes and cleaning homes for people. And you will see that again and again when you read these stories: housemaid, housekeeper, washwoman, and so on. That is what they very often did. But we don't care what we have to do because we are earning money and we are saving. And by the way, we, our extended family, we have sent son number 2 in the family, we have sent him to America. And then we get the letters back. The America letters come and we, the whole family, gather. In fact, the whole community gathers and we read the America letter, which very often starts with, "Thank you for the money that you gave me so that I could come here to the land of opportunity and the land of gold in the streets and money on the trees. You have to work harder, you have to work faster, you have to save more because you have to come." So we get these letters, we read them, and we get an America fever. In fact, the whole community is just feverish with this dream. And then, when the America lines, the shipping lines, when they started, Norwegian America Line and so on, they started sending their agents, I call them missionaries almost. They sent them to not just the big cities, but to the small communities, and they came in and said, this is what you can get, this is what you can get, this is what you can get, and this is what you have to have. Well, what you have to have is $50. That will pay your way from our home community, wherever that is, to America, to the final destination. Doesn't sound like much. We just bought our ticket to Norway, and it was well over $1,000, I think $1,300 or whatever. And so $50 doesn't sound like very much. But for us, who were living between 1820 and 1920, that was the average annual salary. So then you know, for all of us to go, how long we have to work, and how much and hard we have to save to get all of that money. And the shipping lines say, by the way, we will give you space and fresh water only. You have to have so many pounds of pork, you have to have a barrel of salt herring, you have to have a bundle of dried fish, you have to have so many eggs, you have to have so many pounds of bread. Because our trip, we are traveling so early that we are going on a sailing ship. And our trip may take up to 12 weeks. So we have to have food enough for all of us to last for 12 weeks. So in addition to that, in our back pocket, we have to have $25 to start per person to start our new life in the new country. But by golly, we have saved and worked, and we have it now. So we start toward the ticket office. But first, the shipping lines say, oh, all that food that you have to have, we have set up stores, so you can buy the food from us that you have to take with you to travel on our ship across. So here is the store, showing the sugar, the barrel, the potatoes, the flour, on and on. And on the right-hand side here, we have the little ticket office. To buy a ticket, you have to sign a contract with the shipping line. They will put us through a very thorough physical and mental exam. They will examine to find out whether we have been jailed or whatever. And then when they finally have approved us, then we can buy a ticket. And now we have done that, so we can go on to the pier. So here we are on the pier with loads and loads of other people from all over Europe. There are so many different languages and so many different kinds of people. Some people, by the way, in the Nordic countries who were either undesirables because of their political views, or if they were poor, if they were paupers, the country would actually would give them a one-way ticket and say, here, you go away. So it wasn't all earned money that paid for the tickets across the country, across the ocean. So here we are, a beautiful scene from one of the piers. And here is another vignette, a dad and his young son, and a mom and her young daughter. And the photograph shows actually a later ship. That is a steamship. But remember, we are traveling on a sailing ship, so it doesn't look quite like that. But here we are. All of our trunks are packed. We don't have much. We don't own much. And we can take just so much with us. It is incredible that this small chest on top there is what one man left Norway with to come and establish his new life in America with. That little tiny chest, and he carried it on his shoulder. Just think of how much we have in our homes that we have to have, just have to have. And what these people were doing when they came. The mom would pack household goods, clothing, and so on. The dad would pack tools and so on in these chests. And when we have children here, I often say to them, okay, you can go into your room and you can pick one thing to take with you, a stuffy or some little thing. It can't be so big that you can't carry it with you all the time yourself. Well, the children are just shocked at that, of course. So here we are so ready to get on the boat. However, there is a storm brewing in the Atlantic. Oh, that's okay, we are told by the shipping lines, because we have built hotels on the pier. So you can rent rooms from us, so that those $25 in our back pockets, they start getting feet to walk on. But we can't do anything else but just rent a room and wait. And so finally, the storm has subsided and we can wish you welcome on board. So here we are, and we, our extended family, we are traveling so early and with so little money that we are traveling steerage. When I started volunteering here, I had never learned what traveling steerage meant. Well, it means that those boats had previously been used for transporting cattle, steers. They literally shoveled the dung out of the hull of the boat and then built crude bunks. So here we are in the hold of the boat, and there are these crude bunks on both sides. We are quite a number here, so we might be given 2 bunks. I was just reading recently an account where a family of 5 came and they got 1 bunk for up to 12 weeks. The people who are in the top bunk, this person was writing, it was a woman writing it. She said when they got seasick, they just leaned over the edge of the bunk, and so all of this came down right past the head and the bodies of the people there. And about once or twice a day, the people who worked on the boat would come and sweep up what was on the floor. It's so hard for me to understand how people really could live and be like that for 12 weeks. In the center of the room is an open fireplace where everyone cooks their own food. Can you imagine the storm might start raging again? You're cooking all kinds of food here with the smells. There is a barrel of fresh water. The doors get locked when the storm is raging, so we can't get up on deck. So we have now been down below for several weeks with the storm. But finally the sun is shining and we can get up, and the wind is just perfect. We can get up on deck, and we're standing there and just feeling so free and good. And all of a sudden there is a hawk sailing that lands on the mast. One of these people who had been down below with us for weeks and eaten salt herring and dried fish is sick and tired, and he sees fresh meat in that bird. So he runs down below, gets his hunting rifle, and aims at the bird. It is a goshawk. A deckhand sees this, comes over and hits the gun out of his hand and says, "Don't do that. Any living creature that comes on our boat has to be protected. We don't kill it because that means very, very bad omens and bad things will happen." Well, the guy who had fresh meat on his mind, he picks up his gun and he does shoot the hawk that circles and falls on the deck. Actually, it went away, it flew away, it was damaged, it came back, and then finally on the deck. Another passenger runs forward, takes the bird, brings it, hides it, and brings it with him to New York, where he has it stuffed. And that is that bird. That is the goshawk that was brought to New York and stuffed by Isak Dineson's father. Isak Dinesen was the author of Out of Africa. So it sat in his library until he passed away, and then it sat in Isak Dinnessen's, who is a woman. And I like to say, don't tell anyone, because we have it on loan, but it just is such a good story, because on the succeeding trip, that boat, which was the Geysir, it collides with another boat from its own shipping line, which was the Tingvalla line. They collide in the Atlantic, and one of the boats is cut right in two and sinks, and many, many, many people are lost. So, when you are on a boat, don't kill any living creature that comes to your boat, because you know what's going to happen then. So Denmark is the first Nordic country that had its own shipping line. As I mentioned earlier, most people prior to that had to go to Liverpool or some other big city where they could take the boat across the Atlantic. On that boat that went down, that Geysir, the photographer who did the photograph from the Hardangerfjord, he was on the boat and has written about it in his book, which we have upstairs in the gift store. That was Anders Rilse. So it's kind of interesting how we know something about that person here and there and so on. Anyway, he survived, which is very good. Little by little, the laws changed. The shipping lines had to provide more than space and fresh water. They had to provide food. Now, when I came on Bergensfjord from Oslo in 1959, it was amazing. It was a 9-day trip. It was party from morning till the next morning, and more food than I had ever been able to imagine that I would ever see. It was just absolutely beautiful. So little by little the laws changed. Now we have crossed the Atlantic, and I can wish you welcome to Ellis Island. So here we are at Ellis Island, which is about a 20-acre little island in the New York Harbor. It looks like a fairy tale castle, but for most people who came through the great receiving hall at Ellis Island, it was anything but a fairy tale experience. They were met by uniformed officers who were rude and crude very often, who didn't understand their language. They only spoke English or American. They would walk up to you, they would feel your muscles if you were a man, and if you had a little bit of a limp, they would pull you out of line. If you were sneezing or coughing or holding yourself, they would pull you out of line. They would walk right up to you and say, "Have you ever been in jail? Have you ever been a prostitute? Have you ever had tuberculosis?" And if you said or hesitated to those questions, they would pull you out of line. And then, if you were sick, you would be sent into the hospital room. Sometimes a child would have a cold or be sick, and the child would be in the hospital room while the whole rest of the family would be sent on shore. Can you imagine that? Ooh. Anyway, this picture right in the corner here is quite something. It shows what they did with people's eyes. The shoe hook, they would come up to each person, they would turn your eyelid inside out and look underneath the inside of your eyelid. They would turn your lower eyelid and look. Okay, Eric, don't faint. If they saw redness or sores, you would be pulled out of line. That meant that you had trachoma, which was an incurable illness of the eye that would lead to blindness. So it's not glaucoma, but trachoma. Do you think that they disinfected that shoe hook when they went from person to person? Can you imagine having that done to a whole boatload? There were up to 2,000 people that came through this big receiving hall every single day. So that shoe hook went from person to person to person to person to person. So we have now been here. One of the stories that happened, it was told to me by Marianne Forsblad, our first director of the Nordic Heritage Museum. She told me there was a family from Sweden. The father was named Hjalmar. He's first in line, then his wife and 4 sons. And Hjalmar was questioned and finally found to be okay. He had to pull the $25 out of his pocket and show that he had the right amount of money to be able to come into the country. And when he is shoved out of line, he sticks the same $25 to his wife, who sticks it to son number 1, and then it goes to son number 2, 3, and 4. So here came 6 people to start their new life in the new country with $25. That was what they owned. You have to ask, is this absolute stupidity, or is it this insane dream and this huge, huge hope for a better life? So now we have gone through, our family, we have now gone through, and here we are sitting on a bench waiting for a little ferry to take us across the New York harbor into the city. Now I want you to think back on that little tiny community in Hardangerfjord that we looked at, with those few 3-4 wooden structures and the little strip of tillable land. This is what they are looking at now and what is waiting for them. I had an elementary school class here, and I said, okay, what do you think the mom and her little girl are thinking and feeling? And one little girl said, oh, they are scared. And I said, who do you think is more scared, the mom or the little girl? And one boy piped up and he said, oh, it's always the moms who are more scared. I know what these people are feeling. When Bergensfjord came into the New York harbor in August, last day of August in 1959, I'm standing at the railing. We came into the harbor at night. We were not allowed off the boat until the following morning. So I'm standing at the railing looking at these millions and millions of lights of New York City. And I'm thinking, oh my God, can you please make this be Oslo? And of course, it was New York. And I got into the city and through the city and on an airplane and flew to Seattle and came into Seattle that evening. And I am looking down and I see another sea of millions of lights. And I'm thinking, oh God, can you please make it me Oslo now? You didn't do well with my last request. But of course it was Seattle. So here we are. So now we are taking the ferry into the city of New York. So here we are, and this is what we are inundated with, these huge tall buildings, none of which we have ever seen before, huge signs, none of which we can read, languages, none of which we can understand, smells, people selling things, people buying things, people with all kinds of dress and clothing we have never seen before. But we are in New York City, and then we get to where we are going to be living. So here we are. Is this our dream? Is your dream starting to feel fulfilled? Is it coming true? For a lot of people, unfortunately, this is what they ended up living in, these kinds of conditions, in slums, earning very little money, barely so that they could feed themselves. There were rats running around. People from all over the world settled in New York, living in these slums. It was one hellish life for many, many. One Danish carpenter who came, Jacob Riis, he came as a carpenter from Denmark, but he started traveling the country and into these immigration slums and taking pictures and writing. And he sent the letters and his photographs to Teddy Roosevelt, who was then the president. And Teddy Roosevelt and Jacob Riis became fast friends. In fact, at one point, Teddy Roosevelt said, "I think Jacob Riis is the best American I know." So little by little, the laws had to be changed, more care given, more thought given to immigrants who came into this great country. But for many, many people, they never got out of New York. And their dream was just dissipated. And these letters that they had been sending, perhaps from just when the boat was arriving, when they first came to New York, the letters became fewer and farther between, and very, very few words. We have an example of that in our own family. My maternal grandfather had 3 brothers who left North Norway. One of them they never heard from. We have no idea what happened to him. The second one got a job, immediately earned lots of money, came home to Norway as the big American guy and showed himself off and said, "Oh, this is way too small, I'm going back." We have never heard from him again. The third one ended up settling in Westport, Washington. He was a fisherman in Norway. He first worked on these big transoceanic liners, and then he settled in Westport and became a fisherman. When Eric and Leif were just little toddlers, Leif was a baby still, my husband said, "Let's go to the library downtown Seattle and get the big phone book, and I bet you we'll find your uncle there." We went down to the library, and lo and behold, in that phone book is the name of my grand uncle. It said Barney Stoltz, not Bjarne, which was his birth name. And I called. I get this old man's voice on the phone, "Hello?" And I said, "Is this Bjarne Stoltz?" "Yeah," with a big question in his voice. And I said, "This is," and I gave him my name and who I was. I was his brother Peder's granddaughter, and started to explain. And all of a sudden he just says, "I can't talk. You have to talk to my wife." And he was just sobbing. So his wife came to the phone and she said, "Who is this who is making my husband cry?" So I explained to her who I was, and she said, "Oh, you have to come. You have to come this Sunday. Come and visit us." So we took the little boys with us and went down, and on the main drag in Westport was this little white house, and on the stairs, on this porch, stood this man who was a spitting image of my grandfather. That's when I lost it. That's when my tears came. So we spent the day with them, and finally, at the end, I took him aside and I said, "Uncle Bjarne, can you tell me why you stopped?" Oh, he had been writing letters so faithfully all the time, and then nothing. And I said, "Can you tell me why you stopped writing letters?" And he said, "Well, look at me. I have nothing. I am nothing. I never was able to buy my own boat." He said, "There was nothing good to write home about." And I said, "But they still love you back home." And he said, "Oh, don't say that. You're the first relative I've seen in 65 years. So I'm telling that because it is typical of many people who never got beyond New York, who never had their dream fulfilled, who never, if they were given money by their families, who never were able to pay back or do anything for their families. So, but we who are agrarian, we are farmers and fishermen, there's not much farming and fishing we can do in New York, so we hear about the Minnesota territory. So we are going to move west, and we leave New York on the wagon train. We have traveled past Pennsylvania. A lot of the Swedish people who came on the boat with us, they settled in the Pennsylvania area and started a colony there. a lot of the Finns who came on the same boat we did, they settled around the Great Lakes. In fact, the American government sent their agents to Finland to recruit miners from the mining areas in Finland, and a lot of them settled here. But we, who are farmers, we settled in the Minnesota territory. And here, we are here because there is a law that is enacted which gives each person, each adult in the family, 160 acres. And so we are 2 in the family, husband and wife, we get 320 acres. Well, when you think back on that area along the Hardangerfjord, which is so typical of Norway, when we know only that little strip of tillable land, to be given 320 acres, it must seem like we are given half the world. So, when we get that land, we have to sign a contract that in 2 years, we will have proven that we can make that land work for us and feed us and our family. And in the same 2 years, we also have to build a house. And that house has to have 1 door and 1 window. So there is the house we first build. We build it from what is available to us, which is very little wood, but it is sawed from the ground. And look how clever we have been. What is our roof? It is the canvas from our wagon train. So we live there until we can actually make enough profit from our land. We go away, we barter, we trade, we sell, we buy, and finally we can buy enough logs to make ourselves a log home. I can just imagine what a thrill it would have been, especially for the woman in the family, to move out of the sod house into this beautiful log house. So here we are learning how to really grow different crops than we were able to grow in our home countries, but we are doing well and we are enjoying ourselves. Here are some of the pictures of the sod homes. And by the way, the voice you hear in the background, that little alcove there, it's America letters which are being read, that were sent home to the families in the Nordic countries. So here we are. We have done so well that now we have built this gorgeous, gorgeous Midwestern house. And it is a true beauty. And we can finally unpack our trunks, which has grandmother's hand embroidered and hand knitted and hand crocheted items. We have even earned enough money so we have bought ourselves an organ. We are doing well in the Midwest. And the first public building that was put up in any Nordic community was always the school. And here we have a school house. I love this little room because it reminds me of the school where I first taught in the Lofoten Islands. It was a one-room schoolhouse, and we had desks very much like this, with a stove in the corner that I had to feed every day, all day during the winter. Anyway, on the blackboard we can see that these people are learning, the children are learning English. And the people realized there is one thing that is necessary before we can really become successful, and that is learning the language. So who are the first ones? Of course, the children. And to me, it's interesting that with the immigrants today, there are so many parallels with the immigrants of many, many years ago. The first people in the family to learn the new language, the children. The second one in the family to learn it is the father or the man in the family who is out and among other people working. The last one is the mom or the woman in the house. She is the carrier of the traditions, and she's the last one to learn and really embrace all the new things, the language, the culture, and so on. It's interesting that when they realized that they had to learn the new language, They became so eager that they started newspapers, they built schools with just the Nordic language, and so on and so on. They started stores where there was only the Nordic languages spoken. In fact, it got to be so bad that when Warren G. Harding was governor of Iowa, he proposed to the government that a law should be enacted that forbid any Norwegian, and this was Norwegian, by the way, that should forbid any Norwegian to be used in school, in newspapers, on radio, and so on, and it should even be forbidden on the telephone. Of course, that law was never passed. But when you think of the immigrants of today and their clustering, when there is one family settling in one area, pretty soon there are 2, 3, 4, 5, and it was exactly the same with the Nordics when they came. So we're in the Midwest, but we hear about all the wonderful fishing all up and down along the west coast of America. And we hear about the gold rush. So many people head west leave their farms and their land that they have worked up in the Midwest and come west either for fishing or for the gold rush. I don't know how many who got rich on the gold rush, but I know that millions got rich on the fishing. We know that for sure. And of course, Ballard became the fishing capital of the world, I like to say. And that was sort of the center for fishing all up and down the west coast of America. So we have now traveled, our little extended family, we have traveled, we have left, and we have come to Ballard. And the rest of this exhibit in this area was actually made in conjunction with the Ballard Historical Society. And here we have a very typical Nordic house. I can still drive around Ballard and I will look at a house and say, aha, that was made by a Nordic, and that's a Nordic house, and that's a Nordic house. There's just something about them. So here we have this beautiful Nordic house from Ballard. And now we are going to cross the railroad into Ballard. Ballard was a city all to itself until the early 1900s, and it got the railroad before Seattle, and Tacoma also got the railroad before Seattle, and Seattle was furious. So we're going to cross the railroad tracks and go into the city of Ballard. Here is the first city hall in Ballard with a tower with a bell. And that bell was silent for the longest time, for years and years and years. But one woman took it upon herself to start a campaign to get the bell fixed so that it rings. It doesn't look like that, but there is a structure built for the Ballard bell, and it still rings. So that is one very, very good, one good woman's good work. And this is the, what do you call that? The plaiting map of Ballard. Look at that. Doesn't that look square and straight and Nordic? To me, when I look at that, that is so typically Nordic. There is just nothing but square orderliness there. And that's the plaiting map of, the city map of Ballard. And I mentioned that the school was always the first public building that was put up in any Nordic community. The second public building was always the church. And we tried to make a generic church here. However, the minister, whose statue is in there, is Pastor Hovik. He was a Norwegian Lutheran minister, and I'm sure that that's Luther investments on him, so we haven't been able to be very generic here. But Pastor Hovik was a very well-known and loved minister in Ballard for many, many, many years. The statue of him and the statue of Lars Brekke, back there, was made by Brekke's grandson. And evidently these two fellows look exactly like the way they used to look when they were alive. So this is Pastor Hovik. This is the first city hall in Ballard, and the interior here is the actual interior of the first post office in the city of Ballard, which we are very pleased to have here. This corner apotek, or drugstore, was established by an Icelander, very, very close to where we are now in the museum. And Lars Brekke's blacksmith shop is still alive in Ballard. It is now called Brekke Welding. But there he is. Lars Brekke was a man short of stature, but with a huge brain and a very creative mind. When he was given a job to do, he very, very frequently had to make the tools that he would need in order to do the job he would be paid for. And we have been so fortunate to get a lot of the original handmade tools made by Lars Brekke. Here we have one of the beloved policemen in Ballard. This is an Icelander who was 7'4", just a huge, huge man who was truly loved and admired. And when he died, his grave was nothing. He was actually buried without any kind of marker or anything. And I forget what year that was, 1927. This year, correct? This year, a group of policemen took it upon themselves to get enough money to get a proper burial headstone for him. And all the police marched to the cemetery and did this. So I think that is just such a wonderful little story, because that policeman is right here by the first jail in Ballard at the city hall. And you have to come and look inside, look through the grate there. I like to say, I'm sure it's a Swede sitting in jail there. I had the pleasure of chairing the banquet for King Harald and Queen Sonja from Norway when they came. And Queen Sonja was just intrigued with this museum. So we had an opportunity to chat during the banquet and so on. And she said, I just love the Nordic Heritage Museum. And so 3 years later, when her son, Crown Prince Haakon, was a student in California, she said to him, you have one thing to do, it is to drive up to Seattle or travel to Seattle, go to the Nordic Heritage Museum and find the docent with a North Norwegian accent or dialect. So I was asked to be the docent for the Crown Prince's entourage. They came through here, all of them. And I was able to talk in my North Norwegian dialect because they were all from Norway, or they all spoke Norwegian. So the Crown Prince is standing here, very politely looking in when I said, I'm sure that is a Swede. And the Crown Prince turns around and looks at me and he said, no, he's not a Swede, he's a North Norwegian. So here is another boat that we need to, or a boat that we need to talk to, or talk about. This is Constitution. It was owned by a Norwegian by the name of Knudsen, who also lived very, very close to where this museum is. He had worked on the dories. Usually a dory is sent out in the morning with 2 people in each boat, and they fish and get enough halibut, and then they come back to the mother boat and unload, and hopefully, maybe, can go out again and do the same. Anyway, Knudsen had worked on the dories enough so that he had been able to save money and he could buy his own boat. And he was able to do that the year he became a citizen and the year he had his first child. A very proud boat owner. And it's typical of so many of the fishermen who came here to Ballard and started working. I was here with a group of ministers some time ago, and I was telling the story about Knudsen, and then one of the ministers said, oh, did you hear about the fishermen who were standing in front of the judge? and were going to become citizens. And I said, no, I don't think so. And they said, yeah, here they were, a whole group of fishermen, and the judge is asking them one by one, okay, have you read American history? Yeah, I've read history. And so on. And have you learned anything? Yeah, learned a lot. And so the judge asked, so what do you know about the Constitution? Did you hear she came in this morning with 2,000 pounds of fine halibut? So the Constitution means a lot of different things to people. So Ballard early on became this very, very fine fishing center on the west coast. So we talked about some of the people who were having trouble getting their life started in a good way in America. But there are so many more stories of success and really fine work and a beautiful, rewarding life in America. This is Karsten's shoe repair, and it's one of the examples of one of these people who came to Ballard, started a shoe repair or shoemaking shop here. Well, Karsten knew a lot more than making or repairing shoes. He is also the inventor of the ping golf club and of the rabbit ear antennas. So he's just one example of people who really did well as he came to America. And here we have a lawyer's office, but we can't go in there because they are in consultation now, I think. And then we have one of the saloons from Ballard. When I had this group of ministers through here, I just sort of stood and tried to hide this, saying, I don't think you want to see a saloon or a bar. And one minister said, that's okay, don't you know, as soon as they built a new saloon or bar in Ballard, we built a new church. And evidently that is a fact, that there were, for years, the same amount of churches and saloons or bars in Ballard. And this is another Ballard business. When this fellow who had this barber shop, when he passed away, all of his things were deeded and given to the museum. So that's another fine Ballard business. The large photograph here is of the early Ballard Bridge when it was made from wood. That was a beautiful, beautiful structure.
Wow.
And then here we have just a little montage of pictures from our old Webster Elementary School, and then transitioning into our beautiful new museum, the Nordic Museum on Market Street in Ballard. So I hope everyone will come and see this glorious new museum.
This is where you applaud.
Yay!
Thank you.
The poem is called Silent Settlers. Some arrived in luxury, and some arrived in chain. Some were met with open arms, to some it was in vain. To some it looked like paradise, to some it looked like hell. The many, many millions had different tales to tell, but in their hearts they had a song, with hope as common theme. They had a goal, they had a will, but first of all, a dream. And I think that just tells it so beautiful about this exhibit that